everybody, and welcome to our first episode of the Champions of Homecare Podcast. My name is Dave Hancox, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer here at Accra, and I'm joined by my co-host and a member of the Accra Communications team, Jason Dorow. Jason, how's it going today?
I'm great. Thanks, David. I'm really excited to be co-hosting and producing this new venture with you. Hopefully we can help a lot of Minnesotans learn about home care, access the services they need to live independently at home, and we'll have a lot of fun along the way.
Oh, this is going to be great fun. I already know it. I can just feel it. But perhaps, to get started, we should start by answering the question, what exactly is the Champions of Homecare Podcast? Well, we want the Champions of Homecare Podcast to be a podcast for caregivers of all stripes. So if you care for yourself, but you need a little help, if you care for a loved one, if you're a professional caregiver, or even if you're a case manager or social worker whose clients need home care support, the Champions of Homecare Podcast is definitely for you.
And so as we get into each episode, you can expect a certain cadence. We'll cover everything you need to know about home care in Minnesota, but each episode will feature an interview with an industry expert who either explains the nuances of a service program or maybe gets into resources that help you unlock greater independence in your community. We'll also share the latest home care news in Minnesota and provide you with some tips and tricks that make your home care experience as seamless as possible.
That's right. Thanks, Jason. And the Champions of Homecare Podcast is produced by Accra Home Care. And you might be wondering, well, who the heck is Accra? Well, Accra is a nonprofit organization that provides individualized home care services to people with disabilities and older adults, most of whom are Medicaid enrollees. We operate in all 87 counties throughout Minnesota, and we have offices across the state, hopefully providing a kind of a familiar presence in local communities. Our self-directed services support children, adolescents, adults, and families who need help in their homes. And we focus on treating each person as an individual, a unique individual, helping them to lead fuller lives in the community of their choice.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into the various self-directed services at Accra that are available in your community, starting with this first episode. But we'll publish the podcast twice a month, every other week. You can catch every episode by subscribing to the Champions of Homecare Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever the heck you get your podcasts, because they're all over the place now. With that, David, should we welcome in our first guest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Our first guest is Tyler Langenfeld. Tyler is the director of 245D Waivered Services here at Accra. And Tyler, why don't you start out by just telling us what is 245D and who should be paying attention to it?
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Jason. I'm honored to be invited to the first podcast. So thank you again. I'm happy to talk about 245D. As luck would have it, it is my favorite subject. So what is 245D? That's a great question. Let's start from the very top. I mean, technically, 245D is the law that governs the way providers administer some of the services that are available on home and community-based waivers. They're essentially the rules and regulations that providers have to follow in order to provide services. I don't want to get too inside baseball here, but there are two different types of 245D services. There are basic 245D services, which are concerned with health and safety of an individual. And then there's intensive 245D service, while they are also interested in the health and safety of an individual, there's also an element of teaching involved, like skills teaching now. Traditionally, Accra has been solely a basic 245D provider, and we offer several services that fall under that license. So the services are standalone services, but they fall under an umbrella called 245D. So that's why we group them all into one department.
And Tyler, you posed a great potential title for this episode, in 245D or not 245D. That is the question. And I think that kind of leads into our next question for you. Who is 245D for? Who is going to 245D?
Well, to answer the question, yes, 245D is all day long as much as you need, because they are great services. Who they're for? They're for individuals who are on a home and community-based waiver. Minnesota has home and community-based waivers. This could be somebody who they are eligible for medical assistance, and then they have been assessed by the state of Minnesota, and they qualify for one of the disability waivers or the elderly waivers. And what is a waiver? We get this question a lot. It's essentially a menu of services. Now, there are no providers out there that provide every single service that is on a waiver, but Accra provides a lot of them, and many of them fall under the 245D license, which we talked about.
Well, Tyler, let me interrupt for a quick question here. You mentioned being qualified for home and community-based services, and I just want to touch on that again, because as I understand it, that's a specific process. So how would a person know if they're eligible for home and community-based services, or how would they even go about asking that question?
Great question, David. I get this a lot. I will often get a phone call from somebody that says, "Hey, somebody gave me they gave me your number, or I saw your name on a website, or I was looking at Accra, and I'd like to open one of your services." And then we start talking to them, and we realize I have to break the news to them as that we're step 4 in the process, if you will, and they haven't started step 1, 2, and 3. So what are those steps? I let people know you really need to contact your county. So the county that you live in, you contact them and you ask them, "I'm interested in learning more about Waivered Services. I would like to be assessed." So you call your county, you get assessed. There's an assessment out there called Min Choice. It's Minnesota, so everything is Min something. They will send out an assessor. I think the state of Minnesota does a really great job in this, because they will send an assessor out there and they will assess you for all the different services. Because a lot of times people don't even know what to ask for. So what the state will do is they'll send somebody out, they'll assess you for everything. So call the county, get your Min Choices assessment, and then a crucial third step that people sleep on is you will get assigned a county or a contracted case manager. And once you have that, a case manager is going to be that individual that's really going to walk you through what's available on the waiver. And once you have that, then you're at the step of selecting a provider for that specific service that you chose. And hopefully that's Accra. I will say this, I mean, in order for somebody to have, in my opinion, in order for somebody to have successful services, it really is a partnership between the county, the provider, and the family. The county brings that expertise about the waiver, as I mentioned. The provider, we bring that expertise about the specific service, but most importantly, that client or the client's representative, they bring the information about the actual person that's receiving the services. And if all 3 of us are in line, then we can really help some people out.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I just want to verify this, is that for the listener, the important first step is making that connection with the county.
Yes. And, every county has a different number that you would call. I mean, just if you look up Hennepin County, they have something called the Hennepin County front door. And I do, I get, like I said, I get these calls every once in a while, and I will let people know, you call that number and specifically say that you are interested in being assessed for waivered services. And they really will take it from there. I mean, those are the numbers that will get you a county staff that they are trained to answer that question and to start those wheels turning. But
great.
I mean, people jump to us early, which I give them credit. They're Googling, they're figuring out they want some services, but sometimes we have to back them up, and maybe that leads to Accra, maybe it doesn't, but that's okay. We want people to get the services that they're looking for.
Fantastic. And one of the services that I hear a lot of questions about, or that people ask me about, is Respite Care. So could you talk for just a moment about Respite Care, what it is, and maybe how it differs a little bit from night supervision services?
Yeah, absolutely. Respite Services, we're well versed in that because it is our largest 245D service. Although I haven't checked the numbers in a while, but it was way out ahead last time I checked. So I'm assuming that's still the case. But technically, Respite is a break for the primary caregiver. So I'll pause for a second to address what a primary caregiver is, because it's a very technical definition that the state of Minnesota has. And I wrote it down so I would get it exactly right. But a primary caregiver is the person or people principally responsible for the care and supervision of the person receiving services. This is important because sometimes people will say, well, I'm in charge of my own services. I set it all up for myself. So I don't have a primary caregiver, or somebody will say, well, I have a PCA that comes to my house every day and works, so they give me the most care, so they must be my primary caregiver. That's not the case. What we mean in the respite world is the person who is principally responsible for your care and supervision. Respite is a break for that person. And that could take many forms. A break could be 4 hours on a Saturday, or it could be 4 straight days. So you can, go to the casino for the weekend. I can't tell you how many times I've sat across from in somebody's living room and they're setting up these services. It's kind of heartbreaking, but somebody will say, you mean I can go somewhere for the weekend? That's okay. Like, yes, Respite Services is a break for you. So what does that look like? You're hiring somebody to come into your home to, I don't want to say replace you, but to allow you to go off and do what you want to do. You could also, it opens the door to hiring somebody for your loved one or your child or whoever that is to go to their house. So whatever that break looks like. Respite has a lot of forms. I mean, it could be a camp, it could be an assisted living facility, but at Accra, we provide that respite. That is what I mentioned, hiring somebody to either come into your home or hiring somebody to bring the individual receiving the services into their home so you can have that break. Now, David, you mentioned another service that we have here called night supervision.
Yes.
And so this question comes up a lot of like, well, what's the difference? Because a respite staff, clearly I said, you could maybe be gone for the weekend. So that means a respite person can work at night. Well, what's the difference between that and a night supervision, which, if it's very aptly titled, it is supervision at night. So what's the difference? It really comes down to what is the level of care that the individual needs. Now, if somebody needs somebody there as more of a preventative, let's just say like I have a child with a disability, and as a parent, I wouldn't leave them alone at night. I don't know if they're going to need help. I don't know how the night's going to go, but I wouldn't leave them home at night. Well, then a respite staff could be there and I could go have my break, but we don't know if the individual will need anything that night. They just physically need somebody there. Night supervision is really a higher level of care where somebody's there because the client is going to need somebody there at night. It's not just in case they're going to need something. They might need physical care throughout the night. They might need somebody there to ensure that they don't leave. So it's really an important service because we don't see it a lot, but when we do, it's individuals that have pretty high medical needs, and night supervision might be that service that is keeping them in their homes. I mean, they may be one step away from not staying in their homes, and the night supervision is key to them remaining there. So it's pretty powerful. We don't see it a lot, but when we do, it's pretty heavy stuff.
Well, Let me ask a clarifying question on that, Tyler. Would it be safe to say that night supervision is something that, if it's approved, is something that would be available on a more consistent basis, where respite is more of a temporary or intermittent kind of service?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times, what I like about Accra, we have I like a lot of things about Accra, but we have a pretty diverse service menu so people can, mix and match. We see respite coupled with a lot of other services like PCA, right, where, maybe that PCA or another service, meets their needs throughout the day, but that break that the individual, the primary caregiver we talked about, that might be once a month. We see a lot of people that have their day-to-day needs met by one service. And then it's, as you mentioned, respite is sprinkled in for a break every now and then. The night supervision, when we do see that is pretty consistent, 7 nights a week, because that is an individual that needs somebody there, because not just in case, they need them every night to do something.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that clarifying. I appreciate that. Jason, were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was just going to say, especially on respite, Tyler, I felt like you were just scratching the surface on all the different reasons that sometimes people need respite. We spoke with a client recently, a mom in the Twin Cities whose son has a rare chromosomal deletion and needs a lot of care. She cares for him almost all the time. But respite, she described as a lifesaver because she also works. She has a job, like a full-time gig that she has to travel for every now and then. And so occasionally respite gets her a vacation, but often it's for her to go on a work trip and enable her to do that job on top of caring for her son. But it seems like there's a lot of different reasons that people access respite.
Yeah,
Well, Jason, that's a great point. And I think it's not only a lot of different reasons, but I think sometimes parents or caregivers are hesitant to ask for help because they don't want to either overburden or they don't want to look needy or whatever. And respite is one of those intermittent services that can really provide that breathing space for somebody. So thank you for bringing out that additional point. That's great.
Now, Tyler, there are a lot of different options and nuances within 245D. I want to make sure we hit as many of them as we can. Can you tell us about another one that I feel like we've talked about a lot in the past year or so? IHS without training, individualized home supports.
Yeah, absolutely. That would you're hitting the top two, because that is definitely, if it hasn't overtaken respite, it's the one on its heels as our largest 245D service. But individual or IHS without training, which you correctly said is individualized home supports, but we call it IHS. That is a larger umbrella service that it includes 4 different levels. And I won't get, again, I don't want to get too inside baseball, but I will say IHS without training is very much a service that is, it's a basic service. So as I said, it's really focused on the health and safety of an individual. So the people that are there working, they're really there for that health and safety, the personal cares, but there's also that element of taking people out in the community. The second level is IHS with training. Now that is an intensive service. And if you recall back to a little while ago, there's an element of teaching involved in that. And then there's a third one that with family training. So, it's always great when there are several services that are different, but we give them all the same name. So when you hear that term with or without training, we're not talking about the staff. I don't want anyone to think that because we offer a service that says without training, that means we're sending staff out there that have not received any training. It's whether or not the client is receiving any training. So IHS without training means the individual is there to ensure their health and safety.
Well, Tyler, thinking about IHS with or without training, how does that then compare to individual community living supports?
Great question. This personally one of my favorite services, the ICLS. It's very similar to everything that we've been talking about. A lot of times these services get confused for each other because they're variations on the same idea of hiring somebody to come into your home and help you. But this particular service, the individual community living supports, this is a bundled service that has all of the elements. Well, I shouldn't say all of them. Many of the elements that are in other 245D services, but the state has bundled them, and it's specifically on the elderly waiver. So it is not a service that is on the disability waiver, which is a good distinction, because I love the fact that we added this a few years ago, because it really opens up, it allows us to reach more people than we were before, because the individuals on the elderly waiver, they do not have access to IHS without training, the service we just talked about. So this is their version of that. And it just it gave us an opportunity to reach a whole nother population.
Well, does that mean that ICLS includes homemaker services as well, or is that yet again another separate service?
It includes a lot of elements. So, the individual who is receiving ICLS on the elderly waiver, it's personal cares, it's taking on the community, it's household chores. So it really takes elements from a lot of things, which is why it's such a very comprehensive service. And yeah, they call it a bundled service because I feel like they took the best parts of everything and put it into one service and offered it. The disability waivers, over the years, they've become almost mirror images of each other. Several years ago, if it would really matter if you had, let's say, the developmental disability waiver, the DD waiver, or the CADI waiver, but over the course of time, they've almost become mirror images of each other. But the elderly waiver technically is not a disability waiver, so it still has its own standalone services.
And then Tyler, I feel like there's one more program in 245D that's maybe a little bit different from all these offerings that feel pretty similar, and that's the Caregiver Living Expenses Program. Can you tell us what differentiates that program?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that you brought that up, because this is another service that we don't see a lot, but when we see it, it is a very powerful part of somebody's service menu. Technically, Caregiver Living Expense is not a 245D service, but it involves an element. It's usually coupled with a 245D service, so that's why we put it under this department. But basically what it is, giving the individual the ability to have a roommate that is there to help them. And then that roommate is eligible for some reimbursement of their rent. So let's say, I'll give you a real life example. Like I've worked with a couple families where they were hoping that their adult child could live independently. Well, they were able to do that because they found an apartment and they found a roommate. Well, that roommate does provide services to that individual. They do a little, actually IHS without training, a couple hours a week, but they're not on the clock for 24 hours, 7 days a week. But as a roommate, there's an understanding that, yes, this is my roommate, but you're also there to assist them when they need some help as a roommate, almost like a roommate plus. And in return for that, you can get your rent reimbursed through the waiver and some food. The individual that I'm thinking of was actually the first person that I worked with in this service, and they found a place near a college where there's a lot of individuals going to school for nursing and things, and so they've been over the course of several years, they've been able to find a student that it was worth them to live there. They get a great break on their rent, and they're helping somebody. And without that service, I mean, I'm just saying what the family said to me. They never would have imagined that their child could live in an apartment on their own without this step. So again, we don't see it often, but it's one of those services that we really just want people to know about, because if you don't know that exists, then you don't know the possibility of what you could set up for your loved one. It's wonderful.
It sounds like a very practical program that very clearly provides a win-win situation for the two individuals involved. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. We talked a few minutes ago at the beginning of your comments, and you shared really the steps that a person needs to go through to qualify to start receiving 245D services. So I don't want to reiterate that, but I do want to give you just an opportunity to any tips or tricks or inside suggestions you can offer to our listeners for that relate to 245D.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, because as I said, this is my favorite subject, so I've got a few. On the practical side, I will say, we mentioned 245D license. We keep saying the word license. These are licensed services. So if you are a responsible party, or if you are an individual who is accessing this, because it's a licensed service, your staff, the individuals that have been hired to do this, they have to do initial training because they have to be qualified under the license. They have to do that annually. So I think our Accra HR department does an amazing job of alerting people when their annual 245D training is due. But I will say, if you're a responsible party out there, it's in your best interest to know which month your employees are due for their annual training. You don't want to run into a situation where suddenly HR has to give somebody a call and say, well, you didn't do your annual training. So you have to stop working until you get that done. And, we've all been doing home care for a long time, so we know that sudden stopping of access to employees is a major thing. So my first tip is to be aware, have a mind of when your staff are coming up for their annual training, just to make sure there's no lapse in employment. The other thing that I would mention, and I kind of touched on this a little bit before, but I really encourage people to explore their waiver. When you receive that waiver, again, I described it as a menu of services. Personally, I feel like there's some services on there, like the caregiver living expense we just talked about, that do not see the light of day as much. And maybe for no other reason than just people just haven't taken a deeper dive into what's available. Maybe we've fallen into what are the 3 or 4 services that are most commonly approved. And since we're not exploring that waiver to all the different things on there, there are some really powerful services on there that you're not going to know to naturally ask about. So if you have a waiver, pull it up on the internet. It's like getting a menu and looking at the items on the menu that you don't try a new food every once in a while. Just ask your case manager about that. You might be surprised what's there. And finally, just ask questions. I kind of started with this, but I do get a lot of calls from people that will say things like, I was given your number and I don't even know what to ask you right now. I was just told you, I was given your number. I don't know what to ask. And that's fine. You're in the door. We'll have a conversation about what's your situation, what's the situation of the individual you're calling on behalf, and we'll figure it out. Again, that may or may not ultimately lead to services with Accra, but that's fine. always call, always ask, explore that waiver, and get your training in on time. Those are my tips and tricks.
Well, Tyler, thank you so very much for joining us today for this first podcast edition of the Champions of Homecare podcast. Really appreciate the very valuable information that you've shared about 245D, and I'm sure that this has been enlightening for the listeners as well. As you were just saying in your final comments, that there are a lot of services out there under the waiver that you may not even know that you're eligible for. So please be sure to ask about that. So thank you again for joining us today, providing this valuable information and insight into 245D and the related services that you can couple with that. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun, guys.
Great. Jason, I think we want to close out today by kind of updating our listeners with some additional news and information. You want to start?
Yeah, let's open with, we're always going to do a news and views segment here, right, David? So that people have their finger on the pulse of what's going on. And one of the latest things happening is around Medicaid coverage. With the end of the public health emergency, Minnesotans will no longer be continuously enrolled in Medicaid, also called medical assistance here in Minnesota, or MinnesotaCare. And so they will need to renew their coverage. Like all states, Minnesota has maintained healthcare coverage for its Medicaid enrollees during the pandemic, but continuous coverage helped Minnesotans access care during that pandemic and maintained high insurance coverage rates in the state for a long time. With these continued coverage provisions in place, medical assistance in MinnesotaCare has grown 30% to more than 1.5 million Minnesotans. So 1 in 4 people in the state have health insurance through these options. But the end of the public health emergency is leading to a big change, right?
Yeah, it sure is. And thank you for that. What a great point to bring up, because I know that these renewals are in process right now, and there are a lot of people out there that may not be aware of the fact that they need to initiate this renewal. So it's a little bit of background. Congress recently passed legislation, as Jason mentioned, that requires the states to return to the standard Medicaid eligibility procedures. And that means that everybody who receives Medicaid services has to be recertified for those services, which includes an annual eligibility review through the renewal process. And that was begun in the spring of 2023 and continues now. As Jason mentioned, that means that most of the 1.5 million Minnesotans, 1.5 million Minnesotans that are enrolled in medical assistance and MinnesotaCare will need to have their eligibility for these programs reviewed through the renewal process. And they have to initiate that process. So it's really, really important to any listeners out there. If you are a Medicaid eligible individual, reach out to your county case manager and initiate the initiation of that renewal process. It really is up to you. So if you're enrolled in the medical assistance or MinnesotaCare, you can go to www.accrahomecare.org. That's www.accrahomecare.org. And you can click on the banner at the bottom of the screen to find more resources and information about how to renew your coverage.
And sorry, David, I will add one thing. That banner is at the very top of the screen. Very top of the screen, you'll find that banner when you go to Accra.
Oh, top of the screen, yes. I'm sorry, not the bottom. No, that's a good clarifier. We don't want to misdirect people.
Yeah, but there's a little banner at the top that says Medicaid enrollees will need to renew their coverage. So go to accrahomecare.org, click on that, and then you'll find a variety of links that have resources, links to update your contact info, to find out when you need to renew, and to renew your coverage. So all those things in one place for you if you go to accrahomecare.org.
At the top of the screen. Good clarifier. Would have sent them to the exact wrong place.
No, you were just one word off. So close. We have some other important news, specifically legislative outcomes from the latest Minnesota legislative session, starting with big news for PCAs, an increase in PCA wages, right?
Yeah, fantastic news for our PCAs who work under choice programs. The collective bargaining agreement that was approved between the state of Minnesota and SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, will increase PCA base wages for those, again, that are employed by choice providers to $19 an hour effective January 1st of 2024 and $20 an hour effective January 1st of 2025. I want to stress, though, that that is only for PCAs who are employed by choice providers. It's not effective for PCAs that are employed by traditional. Also, along in that same collective bargaining agreement, effective January 1st of 2025, there'll be an implementation of a tiered PCA base rate and the corresponding reimbursement rate based on the number of years of service by the PCA. So there'll be 5 tiers that'll be implemented, and you can certainly contact us for more information about that. The CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, also provides several other training stipends, retention bonuses, one-time bonuses, and other benefits for direct care workers who are members of the bargaining unit. Listener, if you're a member of the bargaining unit, you can contact SEIU for more information about those different benefits, right? Jason?
Yeah, and a ton of work has gone into this, right? A lot of advocacy efforts to make this happen. I know you've been behind the scenes. A lot of folks at Accra have done work to push for a raise in PCA wages. So
Yes.
shout out to you and the team for helping make this happen. And on top of, go ahead, David, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the internal team here, the PA team, the public affairs team that we have put together here at Accra, spent a lot of time and energy on this issue as well as several others during the legislative session. So we're very, very pleased with this outcome. So,
and the other outcome that's pertinent, especially for parents, step parents, and spouses who are paid to perform PCA services, is that it appeared that their ability to provide those services might expire earlier this year, back in May, with the public health emergency coming to an end. But that's not the case, right?
That's not the case. Yes, the Minnesota Department of Human Services was granted an extension by CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services in Washington, D.C. They were granted an extension to allow parents, step-parents, unpaid legal guardians, and spouses to be paid to perform PCA services through November 11th of 2023. Now, people might think that, wow, November 11th, 2023, that's kind of an odd extension date, but it's because CMS only grants extensions in 6-month increments. So this takes it from what would have expired in May to the November date. So that allows for a 6-month extension time period. So that is absolutely fantastic news for these families and individuals who are receiving PCA services from parents, step parents, unpaid legal guardians, and spouses, as we mentioned, because the workforce crisis has not abated. It continues to exist, and many of these individuals have significant difficulty filling the hours and finding caregivers to fill those hours. So, and continuing to enable parents, step parents, and others to provide these services is essential to allowing them to continue to receive the services that they need in the home of their choice and prevent that unnecessary out-of-home placement.
Yeah, I talked with a parent back in early spring in April. As one of the stories that we've shared in the Accra blog, she has a couple of kids with autism, and she's the primary caregiver for them. And she said, "We need this extension. We absolutely need this because it's so hard to find caregivers right now." And as a parent providing services, this was crucial for her.
Well, and to add to that, Jason, I think it's really important to note that the success of that, number one, Accra, to my knowledge, was the only care provider that was kind of keeping this issue front and center during the legislative session as a critical issue. And that led to more than 200 of Accra's clients reaching out to their legislators, and they contacted over 70 legislators during the legislative session.
Wow.
So with more than 200, and that kind of participation by our Accra clients and our coworkers and friends, that's critical, and it creates an opportunity for significant change. And their efforts, our clients and our coworkers and others who drafted those letters and made those points of contact with their legislators, over 200 letters were sent to over 70 legislators. That's incredible, and that makes a difference. So they played a direct role in the continuation of this service as well. This extension that was granted was, they own some of that as well. They were part of that success. And I would just want to make sure that we made note of that too.
That demonstrates the power of the collective and the
Absolutely.
make
Absolutely.
with your voice.
And it really does make a difference to create that relationship with your elected official. I mean, I know that sometimes it feels like, well, I'm only one voice. What could it possibly matter? And this is an example of how it really did matter. Generating that kind of contact with legislators around a specific issue and idea is so critical, and it does have an impact. It genuinely does.
Most definitely. As we wrap up, I want to just remind people, we put the website URL up on the screen earlier, www.accrahomecare.org. If you want to get in touch, go there, or if you just want more information. And for those who want to call, here's the phone number, 866-935-3515. If you have any questions about 245D, about other Accra Home Care services, go ahead, give that number a call, and somebody will be there to help you out.
Great.
Well, final thoughts as we wrap up episode number 1, David?
Well, I think this was a great first episode. I'm really glad we chose the topic that we did, because it put a lot of really valuable information out there for the listener. And I think that's great. And Jason, what a pleasure it was doing this initial broadcast with you. It'll be nice. Looking forward to being co-host with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And Tyler has set the bar high for our future guests.
He really has. He really has. Yeah.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to the first episode of the Champions of Homecare Podcast.
Bye, everybody.